Welcome to the 2015 Anchorage mayoral debate, live from the KTVA 11 studios. Here's your moderator, news anchor Joe Vigil.
All right, and welcome everyone to the special edition of the KTVA 11 News. We hope to provide some good information for you tonight on those folks still undecided. Hope for some good debate this evening on the eve before the election. Now, the candidates receiving more than 5% in a recent poll were invited to attend tonight, and they are Demboski, Andrew Halcro, Ethan Berkowitz, and Dan Coffey. And on our panel tonight, some familiar faces, folks who certainly know what it takes to lead Anchorage's, Alaska's largest city, former mayors Mark Begich and Rick Mystrom. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
And in the spirit of full disclosure, we want to say that Rick Mystrom, a Republican, did donate $500 to Dan Coffey's campaign just a couple days ago, and Democrat Mark Begich did attend a fundraiser for Ethan Berkowitz last month. He says he did not donate. Now, we do want to let you know that the candidates will have 1 minute basically to respond to an initial question. This is how it will all work. From the panel, from us. Then they'll receive a follow-up question, and then their fellow candidates will have a chance to ask additional questions on that topic. So we hope this will be a true debate, and again, provide some very informative information for you for, again, those folks still undecided, looking ahead to the polls tomorrow. So the order of the candidate questioning was selected randomly using an online name selection program. And that being said, we're going to get right to it. And the first question tonight comes from Mark Begich, and it goes to Amy Demboski.
Amy, thanks for being here. I have to say I'm glad I'm on this side of the table tonight, so I know it's the night before the election. I want to talk about public safety. Everyone has talked about the importance of increasing the need of police and officers. It's estimated between 40 and 60 additional officers, even after you take out vacancy factor. More police officers need to be there. How do you plan to make that happen and ensure that we have the amount of police officers that people suggest and people think we need to make this city a safer place?
Sure. I think it starts with staffing, obviously. And staffing, it's more than just hiring officers. We have to work on retention, but we also have to work on morale. That's one of the best ways to start, with working on retention. What we know this year, we're probably going to have between a $4 and $6 million surplus again. I know under Mayor Sullivan's watch over the last few years, every year we've had a surplus. So I think it goes back to prioritization. Will we have to trim some things? I'm sure we will. But to me, the number one thing we have to do and we have to do right is public safety. Whether we're talking about the police department, whether we're talking about the fire department. So I do think we have to robustly increase some of the numbers of officers on the streets. But I think it comes back to where our priorities. And when I see that we spend multi-millions of dollars on a failed software implementation program, I think our priorities have been out of whack, quite frankly. So I think some of those big projects have to be reevaluated so we don't waste more money there. We have to put the money into public safety.
Amy, let me try to boil this down a little bit. The SAP software program you talked about, that's money that's been spent. You can't get it back. It's estimated as, again, 40 at the low, maybe as many as 60 officers. That could be $8 to $10 million on an annualized basis to pay for those police officers. Can you name me 1, 2, or 3 specific things? Because you said trim the budget. Yep. I've read in the past that you're not wanting to raise taxes, so it's the budget.
Sure.
So what will you trim, and not using the accounting, because that money's spent.
Sure.
So what will you reduce to get to this $6, $8, $10 million annual requirement just to get us up to par in public safety?
Sure. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to spend another $40 million on SAP. I can tell you that. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm absolutely going to prioritize public safety, infrastructure projects, and education. Those are my priorities. But I'm also going to look at many of these nonprofits throughout the municipality of Anchorage.
Time's up. Okay, Mr. Berkowitz, you have 30 seconds for a response.
Sure. We have 323 sworn officers right now. Another 23 just went through the academy. In 2009, we had 414 officers. That's much more appropriate to the kind of staffing that we need, because when you have appropriate level of staffing, I know this as a former prosecutor, I worked with officers on all kinds of cases. When you have appropriate staffing, you can do community policing. You can prevent crime before it happens. And so the way you pay for it is there's 376 that are appropriated for currently. And we have two.
Sorry, there's the bell, Mr. Demboski. You have 15 seconds to respond to that.
Well, I just clearly say there's many things the municipality isn't quite doing right yet. We're not even evaluating the nonprofit status of nonprofit exemptions that we give. So I think you have to go back and look at the basics. That doesn't mean you go after churches, but it does mean people who don't qualify for nonprofit exemptions shouldn't get them.
And Mr. Coffey, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, well,
to that.
part of the situation is I don't believe there's going to be a surplus this year. So I've been talking to someone in the administration. I'm told that there will not be one. And so we're going to have to just basically make our choices about what we're going to spend our money on. And part of the situation is it's difficult to say this or that, but I'll tell you, the criteria should be things that are less important and less essential. We have to take that funding and put it to the priorities. And number two, those things we don't do well or others do better, we need to eliminate those kinds of programs.
15 seconds.
Well, it goes back to prioritization for sure. But as a sitting member of the Anchorage Assembly, I can tell you right now, just a week ago, I was being told there was $4 to $6 million surplus. So it's how we choose to spend that money, and it's where we choose to put our resources.
Mr. Halcro, you have 30 seconds to respond to all
Well,
this.
and it's not just staffing. I mean, Mayor Mystrom, you hired a tremendous amount of police in the late 90s. All of those officers are now coming up on their 20 years. So when we talk about producing more officers and recruits through the system, we're still going to have a fairly large degree of attrition to get back to where the police force was in your days and Mayor Begich's days. But I think this comes down to really a management issue, because when you listen to Ms. Demboski, really for the last 2 years, these problems have gone unresolved by both the mayor and the assembly.
You have 50 more seconds for the last
What it comes down to is, yes, we have to increase staffing, but it's how you deploy those resources. You have to reinvest in specialty teams, because rapid deployment of small individual teams to focus on problem areas, that's the way you get better police results.
Okay, and Rick Mystrom now has a second question to Mr. Coffey.
Dan, stand on public safety. We have in this city a huge diversity of people from different cultures. So we're up in around 40% of the people who either came from other cultures, were born in other cultures, or they speak that language at home. In a lot of cases, they came from countries that they were afraid of police, they were afraid of political leaders. They're very uncertain and very intimidated in a lot of ways with leaders in the community. In order to be a safe community, we have to get those people comfortable with both the police and the mayor. What would you do to give all our cultural groups more comfort with the mayor and the police?
Two things. In the police hiring and selection process, we need to put people from the different ethnicities or different races into that process, not to dominate it, but to give a different perspective as to how we ought to be hiring. When the police are doing it. It's not just the police officers hiring police officers. Secondly, the other thing, I looked at the diversity figures from both the city and in 14 and the national, the census. And in the police department, the imbalance is real clear. 66% of our officers are white in the sworn officer field. And if you look at every other category of race or ethnicity, they were far below the numbers that we face in the population. You know, 3% of these sorts of people, 1.2 is what we've got on the police. And that's Asians, Hispanics, South Sea Islanders, Native people. We're below in every one of those 5 or 6 categories of ethnicity and race. And we have to fix that.
Okay, I think that's important, but even more important, I think, is the confidence that people of different cultures have in the mayor. And what are you going to do as mayor to let those people know that you're approachable, that they're welcome in the city, that their leaders or just general people from that community can talk to the mayor?
Well, that's what I've done for the last 18 months. I've been out and about and talking to so many different kind of people. I learned a whole host of things from, you know, every different ethnic community. I visited with them, I met with their leaders, I've talked to them, and that's what I'll continue to do as mayor.
Mr. Halcro, your response, you have 30 seconds.
Sure. Over the last 2 years as president of the Anchorage Chamber, diversity outreach has been one of our key initiatives, and we've gathered about 13 or 14 community leaders from the different emerging ethnicities around the table, talked about things like education, affordable housing, economic opportunities. And it really is essential for City Hall to really tighten the ties and reestablish the ties with the minority communities, because once you get staffing of the police up, you have to get police back into the neighborhoods to be proactive. So the first contacts with some of these groups are not adverse, they're actually positive.
You have 15 more seconds to respond.
Well, I mean, he's described a situation that has to occur, and people like the bridge builders have been working on that. The Roberts and others in that organization, and it's an outreach and a communication and a willingness to work with and deal with and cooperate with these folks.
Ms. Demboski, you have 30 seconds.
Well, it comes down to community involvement, and you have to be approachable. You have to be someone who values those relationships, whether we're talking about the Native corporations or tribes, or we're talking about the Filipino community or the Samoan community. Any of those communities, you have to value those. This administration doesn't even have a community outreach person anymore. What kind of message does that send? You have to tell people, I value you. I want you to be part of the discussion, and you have to let them be part of the discussion.
15 seconds.
Again, this is a common theme, and she's right. But the way in which you do it is you first of all have to understand all that in the diversity we have a lot of strength. That brings a lot of different strength to the community, and we need to recognize that and respect one another and treat one another fairly and openly.
Mr. Berkowitz, you have 30 seconds.
This is a personal question for me. My kids are both in a Spanish immersion program. This is, my wife helped found the Alaska Immigration Justice Project, and so dealing with people who are new to Anchorage and still call Anchorage home is something personal. And Rick, when you made mention of people who were afraid of police because of where they came from, I'm recalling an incident when I was a young man, and I had an aunt who spent the war in hiding, and she collapsed, and we called the paramedics, and she wouldn't talk to them because they were in uniform. So that fear of people in uniform is something I know personally.
15 seconds for the last word, Mr. Coffey.
The effort has to be made because we are very diverse, and if you look at it and you don't make the effort in a whole variety of ways, then we will never break down these barriers. We will never respect one another or deal with one another in ways that advantage the city and make it a great place to live.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to question 3 is actually a social media question. The first one is going to go to Mr. Halcro, and the question being this: are you in favor of equal treatment of all Anchorage citizens, including LGBT folks in
Yes.
town?
We are one community. And equality does not have any degrees. Either you have equal rights or you don't have equal rights, and we need to have equal rights in this city.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me do a quick follow-up if I can, and that is recognizing your position as what will you do in city government to ensure that happens, making, maybe on boards or commissions or employment.
Sure.
What will you do to lead on that issue, if at all?
Well, I'll continue to do what I've been doing the last 2 years as president of the chamber. I mean, we launched the only LGBT outreach of any chamber of commerce in the country. As a matter of fact, we were the only chamber of commerce to bring up the president of the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
So my goal is to integrate the community.
Okay, Mr. Coffey, you have 30 seconds to respond to that.
Yeah, well, I went through the hearings on the ordinance, 3 or 4 years ago when I was on the Assembly. And the one thing I missed and never heard and asked about was, show me where this discrimination is taking place, make the case for it, so that we bring the government in to protect the interests that you're saying is denied. And we heard 5 days of hearings, and I never heard the answer to that question. So I say it again, show me. And if it exists and is real, we got to treat people fairly.
15 seconds.
Well, the fact of the matter is, why should you have to prove there's discrimination? I mean, this is an equal rights ordinance that makes sure everybody is treated equally. Why should somebody have to come before you and show you they were discriminated against to get equal treatment?
Mr. Berkowitz, 30 seconds.
We teach our kids to pledge allegiance to the flag, liberty and justice for all. There's no exception for people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And because of that, I vehemently support the idea of making sure that everybody receives equal protection under the law, regardless of their identity or how they choose to worship or any other ways that we distinguish ourselves in this community.
15 seconds.
Well, having grown up in this community for 50 years, there was a time when we all were a much tighter community, and it seems over the last few years we've kind of separated, and I think that needs to be fixed.
Ms. Demboski, you have 30 seconds.
I absolutely do not believe in discrimination, but I absolutely will hold firm on religious freedom as well. And what that means is if someone has the ability to practice their religion and to abstain from participating in other things, I will support that. I believe in freedom of conscience, and calling it equal rights, you're infringing on someone else's liberty to practice their religion. And I absolutely have said I will stand with the people of Anchorage and oppose Prop 5 if it comes back.
Last word.
Well, again, you know, the issue of discrimination is real, and you know, we're all for religious freedom. I'm for religious freedom, but when you allow somebody to discriminate under the guise of the law, that's wrong.
Okay. Moving on, I'm going to ask a question now. This is to Ethan Berkowitz, and my question is this: what role will the city, under your leadership, play in regulating the sale of marijuana?
Well, the first thing we need to recognize is that currently the regulation of marijuana is something that's being determined at the state level. And I think that what we need to emphasize is that we're going to have to do the things that are important for public health and public safety. Those are area restrictions, making sure the marijuana is not sold too close to schools, making sure that marijuana is not being sold to people who are underage. But as we contemplate the dangers, the potential dangers that marijuana poses, we need to remember that we have a current drug that's legal in this community, and that's alcohol. And much as we've talked about making sure that we treat marijuana like alcohol, I want to make sure that just because people are focusing on the potential problems of marijuana, we don't back away from the need to do the right things as far as alcohol is concerned. The detox beds, the rehabilitation, making sure that alcohol isn't sold too close to schools or to people who are underage. So there's a whole panoply of things that we have to do, not just focusing on marijuana. So
people can now smoke marijuana legally, recreationally. If you got word as mayor that a Muni employee had tested positive for marijuana on a drug test, would you fire them?
If someone tested positive for marijuana who was in a prohibited class, absolutely I'd fire them. It's the same way if someone showed up drunk, I would fire them, because that becomes a public safety issue.
30 seconds, Ms. Demboski.
You know, our role as a municipal government is we have to create land use codes, we have to do licensing, permitting, and potential discussion about taxation. So those are the conversations that we're going through right now on the Anchorage Assembly. And those are the things that we're trying to work through. It's complicated because this is still a federally illegal substance.
15 seconds to respond.
I always like it when people take refuge in federal overreach when it suits their purposes. The feds are just invading on Alaskans' right to privacy. In Alaska, we have a constitutional right to privacy, and we have to protect that right to privacy.
Mr. Halcro.
I think the key thing moving forward is good data, because when you look at other states like Colorado and Washington, they can't tell you if DUIs are up, if school attendance is up or down, or theft is up or down. And I think one thing the city has to do is collaborate with the state and keep good data, so in 2 or 3 years we can mold public policy to really address maybe some of the negative trends that we might see occurring. But again, the collaboration on data, public safety, education, socioeconomics is critical moving forward.
15 more seconds.
Sure, we need to be absolutely vigilant about the changes that manifest themselves. But 100,000 Alaskans use marijuana already because it is constitutionally legal for people to consume. So,
Mr. Coffey, go ahead and jump right in.
Well, when it first passed, I made some calls to people in Seattle, the city attorney's office, to get some information if I could, and basically they don't know either. And I understand the same thing out of Colorado. So it's coming. The ABC board is writing those regulations now. There's 3 ordinances or statutes before the legislature. We're going to have a law, we're going to have a regulation, and then it's going to fall on us. Land use codes and that sort of thing, licensing, permitting, and so on. How that's addressed, you know, it's going to take some time and effort, but we got to know what the parameters are before we can do it.
Last word.
You know, I remember having this conversation with my daughter when she asked about marijuana, and I said very clearly, when you're an adult, you can make informed decisions about what you want to do with your own body.
Okay, and I have a question. This one goes to Mr. Coffey. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing Anchorage, and what will you do to start solving this problem in the first 60 days if you're elected mayor?
Well,
biggest problem.
Okay, let's talk about the housing. We know about the public safety. So let's talk about the fact that we haven't built a lot of housing lately. And there's 3 elements to how we can deal with that. First of all, the city has a fair amount of land in the Heritage Land Bank, some of it unsuitable, but some of it suitable for housing. That should be put into the private sector through bids and sales or auctions or however you want to do it. And there should be zoning or special limitations on that so that we direct it toward the types of housing we need, which is predominantly, in my judgment, workforce housing. That's one element. The second is the regulatory and ordinance schemes, which we have a lot in the new Title 21, which basically burdens people without a substantial benefit being put on back into the community. Then there's no value there. There's just a lot of impediments. And the final thing that we need to do is the culture at the permit center has not been conducive to the building and development of housing or commercial property. It takes forever to get through that process. We need to change that process, and there's ways in which that can can be done, and I've spent a lot of time studying how that might occur.
So of those three, what would you do in the first 60 days?
The last,
specifically,
I'm going to get out there with the
exactly?
folks, get out there with the folks who work at the permit center, go to the people who are down at the, doing the actual work, find out how their processes work, how we can make them better, and
okay, Mr. Demboski, you have 30 seconds. I think we all heard it.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify to make sure I didn't misspeak, but on the Prop 5 question, I want to make sure I'm clear that I do not support Prop 5. But secondly, the first thing we have to do is we have to redeploy these special teams at APD, which means we have got to bolster staffing. And so we have to work with APD to make sure we have officers that are ready and capable to work and deploy in a way that serves people.
You have 15 seconds on that?
Well, I was talking about the housing, and so what we need to do is basically change the culture out there, which has been problematic for some time. And I believe that 95+% of the people who work for the city are good employees. They want to do their job, they want to be respected, they want to be treated appropriately.
Mr. Berkowitz, you have 30 seconds to respond to this.
There's various different time horizons that we have to contend with, and we've talked about public safety, we've talked about housing, but I think what we haven't discussed enough in this campaign is the potential danger that the force reduction poses to this municipality in terms of what it's going to do to our economy, what it does to our relationship with the military. So the most immediate problem we have to confront is the potential of force reduction on the bases.
15 seconds on that.
We're going to have to wait and see. There's really not much we can do about it. If they reduce the force to the degree they're talking about with the dependents, we're going to have a lot of housing available, but that's not the kind of way I'd like to have the housing built. But so we'll see what they come up with. I think all of us, or a lot of us, have certainly participated in the effort to stop it.
Mr. Halcro, your response?
I think the next mayor has to be multitasking. I mean, you know, you have an affordable housing problem, you have a public inebriate problem, you have a police force that needs to be rebuilt, you have a Port of Anchorage that needs $400 million in financing, you have a business software program that's $40 million over budget, you have minority communities that need ties reestablished. I mean, this next mayor in the first 60 days is going to have to do more than just one thing. They're going to have to do a number of things, and they're going to have to do them well.
Yeah, last word on that, Mr. Coffey.
Well, these are all issues that we've all talked about over the last 9 months or however long we've been in it, and most of them are well identified by all of us, and we tend to talk about the same sorts of things. They do require the attention. There's no disagreement about that.
Okay, thanks. Rick Mystrom now has the next question to Andrew Halcro.
Andrew, if I were to give the new mayor some advice, I would say there's 3 primary responsibilities that a new mayor has, or that any mayor has, and that is to create a vision for the city, to develop a strategy for reaching that vision, and to align the forces to make that happen. I mean, that's the basic responsibility of a mayor. So I'm just going to ask you about the first 2 right now. What is your vision for Anchorage that you see, and what is your strategy for reaching that vision? My vision for Anchorage is actually starting to govern and lead this city for tomorrow, not for today. I mean, you have a growing demographic of millennials, 82,000 in this community. We need to work on innovative housing. We need to put some polish, a lot of polish on downtown. I know that was one of the focuses you had when you came into office. We need to make downtown safer. We need to deploy tax incentives and tax deferrals to develop innovative housing options and retail mixed-use housing and mixed-use developments downtown. We do absolutely need to have a vision for the future, because I think the challenge is the last 6 years we've governed for today and not tomorrow, and now we have some work to do. But we have to have this vision. I want a vibrant, brilliant city. I want a city that's electric, that not only the millennials want to stay here in the future, but we generate more tourists, and seniors actually have, you know, innovative places to live. There's housing opportunities. I want a city of tomorrow, which is going to be based on 3 things: talent, talents, and technology. Let's stick with the downtown part, the revitalization and continued revitalization of downtown. Who would you line up to make that happen? Who would you align to make that happen? It's going to take, it can't just be the mayor. It's got to be other people and forces, and you've got to lead that. So who's going to make that happen? Absolutely. You need a collaboration. The first thing I'd do is I'd bring in AEDC to start looking at tax abatement and tax deferrals. I don't think the Assembly nor City Hall has the capacity to really fully analyze what kind of tax incentives or tax developments. So first thing is you have to engage AEDC. The second thing is the mayor really has to engage on the public inebriate problem.
And Mr. Coffey, You have 30 seconds to respond to that.
The abatement and deferral is something that has been on the books for a long time. We have that already available. And now for the first time, we've created what can be called a redevelopment zone, which is Fairview in the east end of downtown. We need to understand that deferral and abatement of taxes is revenue neutral, produces the same revenue to the city as we get today. When time goes by, that goes back to the value of what they have done and redeveloped. So we need to use that, and we need to use our very good bond rating to build infrastructure, sewer, water, and so on, and rehabilitate those areas of town. I didn't hear a ding.
15 seconds to respond to that.
I love the Fairview overview plan, but the Assembly and the City Hall just simply doesn't have the capacity to do it right, nor to understand the problem. And more importantly, the Fairview City Plan has been slow-rolled by the administration because they were never really in favor of it.
And Ms. Demboski, you have 30 seconds.
Oh, I'd have to say the many thousands of people that voted for me don't think I'm not smart enough to deal with this issue. But what I will say is, you know, we need an affordable place to live. We need a safe place to live. We need a mayor who takes a holistic approach, who looks at the issues and understands that if people can afford to live here, if we have a safe streets to live and to walk, then we can have a vibrant economy. It's all interconnected. We can't look at one thing and say, this is how we're going to do it. We have to look at the big picture.
Look, I certainly didn't mean to insult your intelligence, but I mean, you know, let's be honest. I mean, the Assembly meets, you know, one day a week. You have a couple of committee meetings. You simply don't have the capacity to look at tax deferrals and tax abatements. I mean, you need a professional firm to come in, look at the various parts of the city, and identify what would work the best, and then show taxpayers what they're going to have to give up and what they're going to get in return.
If you want to respond, go ahead.
Well, I would just simply say some of us as Assembly members work 60, 70 hours a week and work very hard at this. I do have an MBA in finance, and I can understand tax policy. So I appreciate that very much.
Well, and I would just make the comment that for the last 2 years, there haven't been anything done on this.
That's not true. We passed the Fairview District Plan.
You passed the Fairview District Plan 4 months ago. And it wasn't until Patrick Flynn became chairman and had the deciding vote. This administration slow-rolled.
I voted for it.
I'm not saying you did. What I'm saying is this administration has been no friend to redevelopment.
Okay, Mr. Berkowitz, you have 30 seconds to respond to this.
Am I answering a vision question or a development question?
We're joining into their conversation.
Yeah. You respond any way you want.
All right. Well, I'll take the vision thing because that's something we talk about around the dinner table all the time. And I want to have an Anchorage that my kids stay in and continue to call home. I want an Anchorage that truly is the gateway to the Arctic and the air crossroads of the world. And that means we have to take care of foundational things like making sure we're safe, secure, and strong. It also means that we have to have the kind of infrastructure that allows Anchorage to compete and develop the wealth of Alaska in the 21st century. We do that, we're going to be an amazing place. We're a great place already, but we have great potential ahead of us.
You have the final word, Mr. Halcro.
Sure.
Go ahead.
And after 50 years of growing up in Anchorage, I mean, there's no question that this is a magical place for those of us who grew up here. But I do think that we need a sense of urgency, and I do think when you look at the Assembly and you look at the administration over the last several years, I mean, what have we had? We moved the election dates, and we fought a 2-year battle with a labor ordinance that was really irrelevant and the public voted down. So I think the focus has to be on governing for the future instead of today, as the positions have been the last couple of years.
Okay. Moving on, Mark Begich has a question for Ethan Berkowitz.
You know, I was going to ask the vision question, but I'm going to change it up now because I thought this was an interesting discussion regarding you're all running for mayor. Your hope is to win, one of you 4. Some of you have served on the Assembly, some have worked with the Assembly. I want to take that question or that comment and see if you agree or disagree. Do you think the Assembly has capacity to deal with these issues as a mayor and working with them? What will you do to ensure they have capacity, or do they have the capacity now and they can deal with these big issues? As Andrew has identified, they don't have capacity. Amy says they do. Where do you stand on this?
I believe in our system of government, and I know that the Assembly has the capacity. An Assembly working in conjunction with a leader that are pulling in the same direction, working with the private sector, working with the nonprofit sector, we can achieve great things. I look at the assets that Anchorage has, the native corporations that have stabilized our economy, the oil and gas industry that brings the wealth of the North Slope down and helps us grow here, the schools, the students, the people we have, the diversity we have here. We have amazing strength. And I think the Assembly, working in conjunction with the mayor, can do amazing things to get us where we need to go. But we have to have some kind of shared vision. And over the last couple of years, it's been too much about the politics of division. Who's going to win an argument instead of how we're going to solve problems? And a mayor can help coalesce things around problem solving. That's the kind of mayor I want to be.
So, do you think the Assembly has the capacity then?
Yes.
Do you think they, because I got 30 seconds, so I can
well,
drill down a little deeper
here.
Do you agree then, or I guess the comment that occurred was the Assembly just doesn't have the capacity or the time. Do you think that's important that they have the time? And what will you do specifically to help the Assembly or engage the Assembly? You've talked about that's important. What will you do? What will be the role of a mayor in your administration?
A mayor that works well in coordination with the Assembly, they don't have to be at each other's throats all the time. They can work in conjunction. They can leverage each other's strengths. And that's how we get the best out of both the mayor's office and the Assembly.
Andrew Halcro, you have 30 seconds.
Sure, absolutely. If the mayor and the Assembly are pulling in the same direction, the possibilities are endless. But when I say lack of capacity, I mean, sometimes there is the need to bring in a nonprofit or somebody like AEDC to look at tax abatements and look at tax deferrals and bring an outside view to show taxpayers that you've had that independent review. And when you talk about the capacity of the Assembly, I mean, I would simply just point to history. I mean, look at some of the things we're talking about. Public inebriates, worse. Public safety, worse. Public finances, SAP, and the port, worse.
You have 15 seconds to respond to that.
Almost every one of those examples, Andrew, that you cited, there's a plan out there. I mean, Mark, when you were mayor, you had a plan for dealing with homeless. There's plans out there to do it, but you need a mayor who leads and works in conjunction with the Assembly to make things happen.
Mr. Coffey?
Well, I'm glad you asked the one fellow who actually worked on a tax abatement and deferral situation when he was on the Assembly. And if you look at McKinley Towers down on 4th and Eagle, you will find a very successful redevelopment project with 12 floors of apartments, 10 a floor, 120 apartments, affordable rents, and it's absolutely full. I think we had the capacity to do it. I think we did it. Now, did we have advice from financial people and so on? Of course we did. We didn't operate in a vacuum.
15 seconds.
Look, the Assembly, in essence, is the board of directors. The mayor is like the chairman of the board, and they've got to work together if you want to make sure that Anchorage prospers the way it can.
Ms. Demboski, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I'm not going to sit here and take the blame for everything the previous administration has done. But what I will tell you is my record on the Assembly is very clear. I have worked across the aisle with multiple times. I'm proud of the fact that I dig deeper. I'm proud of the fact that I have a number of public safety issues passed. Absolutely, we deal with independent advice that comes our way. We often go that route when we look for expert advice. But what it comes down to is the people of this community have elected people to represent them, and if you're saying they're not qualified to do it, I'm sorry, I'm not willing to give up that easy.
You have the last word on that. Go ahead.
The institutions of government we have come under a lot of abuse over the last couple of years. If you believe in our system of government, then you got to make sure that the Assembly and the mayor work together, and work together not just between themselves, but with the entire community.
All right, moving on, we're going to do a question from social media. This one first goes to Ms. Demboski, and the question is this: what will you do to improve safety for bicycle commuters?
Safety for bicycle commuters. Well, you know, honestly, my focus right now is safety for the whole community. So it's hiring more cops or police officers. I apologize. What was that?
How about bicycle commuters?
Bicycle commuters, you know, I got to tell you, it's not my primary focus. It's not. I hope we keep the streets shoveled or plowed. I hope we have areas for them to ride their bikes. But my primary focus is going to be public safety, getting police officers on the street, making sure we have an adequate fire department staff, making sure our basic infrastructure is taken care of.
Okay, let me follow up, Mark, with this one. And that's good. It's always good to go back to public safety. But we've had 3 bicyclists killed in the last 18 months now. And so it's a fairly serious issue. There's a lot of people who would like to ride bikes. We have a great trail system, but some of the trails go along roads. So there's got to be some attention given to that, and you can't just say we'll deal with public safety in general without considering all the elements of it. So what thoughts do you have about bicycle safety?
You know, when it comes to bicycle safety, like I said, the trails that we have now, I think we have to maintain them. I don't mind helping with raising awareness as far as, stop and look both ways before you go. Some sorts of public service advisories, but I'm here to tell you my primary focus is the essential services of government. And I want to make sure all of our citizens are safe, absolutely, but I'm not going to invest millions of dollars into creating new bike paths. That's not going to happen.
It is true. We have many paths that go along streets where you're just feet away, and it is kind of scary for driver and for bicyclists as well. Go ahead and you take 30 seconds on that.
What we haven't done enough is recognize the growing bicycling population in Anchorage, and there's a lot more people riding bikes even during the winter. Those fat tire bikes are everywhere. So we need to make sure that the lighting is adequate so drivers and vehicles can see them, so pedestrians can see them. We need to have a bigger campaign making people aware that bicyclists are more and more part of what's going on. And I think we ought to give a serious thought to looking for dedicated bicycle streets or bicycle routes so that bicyclists can ride with a much greater degree of safety.
Go ahead. Take 15 more seconds.
Well, I don't know that I'm going to dedicate any streets to just bicyclists, but my husband rides in the wintertime. He does. He's almost been hit a couple of times, but I think that's where it goes back to. I do agree public safety campaigns are a good way to go, but the primary focus has got to be we are a motorized community.
Mr. Halcro, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're a winter city, and as Ethan said, more and more people are biking in the winter now, and I think there's certain roles a city can play. We're not talking about having to go out and pave new bike trails, but we certainly need to take care of the ones we have, make sure they're plowed in the wintertime, and not just for bikers, but for people waiting on the sidewalk, waiting to catch the bus or walking to and from. I think we need better lighting at intersections, better traffic lights, better traffic signage at major intersections.
Mr. Coffey, what's your take on bicycle safety?
Well, when I was on the Assembly and Mr. Begich was mayor, we bought half a dozen, I believe, plow trucks or plowers that would plow the sidewalks. 36 is one that's plowed, and if we continue to do that, that makes the winter biking a little easier. And the other thing is, we get federal funding when we rebuild major roads and intersections, and so you can use that portion. In fact, it's required that you use that portion of the federal funding for those sorts of purposes, pedestrian and bike riding and so on. So we have mechanism to address it, but it's not the top of the heap for me either.
Last word, go ahead.
I just say it goes back to, if we maintain what we have, if we plow the streets quickly, if we plow the sidewalks when we can, if we do those sorts of things, a public service campaign, that's fine, but we can't be everything to everybody, and we have to put our priorities in line, especially in this economic climate we're in. And to me, unfortunately, bicycle safety is important, but it's not the first thing I'm going to focus on.
Okay, Rick Mystrom has a question for Ethan Berkowitz.
Ethan, I'm going to talk a little bit about school district, and that's one of the biggest parts of our budget. When I was first on the Assembly in 1979, the school district budget and the city budget were about the same. Now the school district is twice as high as the city budget. But I just want to focus on capital right now because that's a big issue. Number one, are you going to vote for the bond proposition that's on the ballot now? Second, have you ever voted no on a bond proposition for a school building? And third, can you imagine any circumstances where you would vote no on a bond proposition for a school?
I'm voting for the bonds. I don't recall ever voting against a bond for a school. And what was the third question?
The third question
this is why I need to go back to school. This is why I need to build more schools.
Can you imagine a situation where you wouldn't vote for a school bond?
Yes, I can imagine a situation where I wouldn't vote for a school bond.
Okay, well, we're likely to be faced now over the next 5 years of not having any state reimbursement.
So, but this is also part of something that needs addressing too, is the state is retroactively trying to change the rules. That's wrong. You should never retroactively change the rules, and they should be held to task for that. But I also look at the fiscal straits that we're in as a state and look at the benefits of bringing in bond money to help solve some of those problems. Bonding is, the reason why bonding makes so much good sense today is you watch the feds lower the interest rates. They're doing that because they want people to borrow money. It encourages people to do the riskier things like build schools or build houses. And so bonding is one of the ways we're going to bridge the fiscal gap. And so this is a very good time for us to bond, particularly as the state is in a very unstable situation.
Go ahead. Do you have another question? Feel free.
Well, okay. Let me follow up on that just for a second, and that is we built some great schools, and I do agree that bonding gets money into the private sector. I think that's really good. But how about the operating budget? Now, the mayor can only veto the whole budget. He doesn't have any line item role. And I think there's one mayor in the history of Anchorage who has vetoed a school district budget, and he's asking the question, can you imagine vetoing an operating budget for the school district? Can you imagine a situation where you would?
No, because I think I'd work in conjunction with the school board to develop the kind of budget that reflected the budget realities that we'd have to deal with. But I also think that cutting school budgets is like turning our back on the next generation. We as a society have prospered and benefited by investing in public education, by making sure that our young people have the educational skills they need to compete and succeed in the world. We make sure that with their K through 12 and vocational tech, and I think turning our back on them just because the state's in a tough situation ignores our responsibilities.
Mr. Coffey, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the bonded indebtedness in the municipality as of now is $1,020 million. We lay out $55 million by the city today to pay that indebtedness for our share of it. And of course, it's all the full faith and credit of the whole city for both school and the city. And the obligation for the school bonds is $87 million, but we get 55% reimbursement on that. So it actually boils down to about $39 million. So 55 and 39 is $94 million annually that we pay out in bonded indebtedness.
Sure, but we've also, every year we retire bond debt, so it's not a net addition to the municipality or to the taxpayers of the municipality.
That's been the case for the last few years. This administration has done that. They won't put any more on the ballot than what they've retired. The school district has said that that's what they've done as well. And so if we're doing that, then the bonded indebtedness has gone down, but still something nearly $100 million a year is a lot of money. And when we're in tough times, we got to be careful about how we spend it.
Would you like to jump in, Ms. Demboski?
Oh boy, would I ever. So let's be honest here. Ethan and Andrew both supported rating the PFD to spend half of the distribution of that for education spending. They're both big spenders when it comes to education. You know, I don't think the quality of our education is reliant upon how much money we spend. But to answer your question, Mayor Mystrom, I'm voting no on the school district bond, and yes, I've voted no before.
I see Mr. Halcro shaking his head no.
Well, I think Ms. Demboski, who talks a lot about fiscal policy, actually ought to understand at least what Ethan and I dealt with in 2000 and 2001 when we were in Juneau before she makes comments on it. I am voting for the bonds. I am very concerned about the future if they eliminate school bond debt reimbursement. I do feel in the future the mayor's going to have to work closer with the school district and closer with the school superintendent to make sure that budgets that arrive on the desk are in line with current economic conditions. I don't think there's any question that $50 a barrel oil is going to make some hurting in the next couple of years. But you know, 93% of the kids in this city go to public schools, and that's where the investment needs to be. And you know, we talk about fiscal policy, we talk about a laser focus on taxpayers. I'm concerned about the health, the safety, and the economic growth of this community, and that entails education.
Last word on this.
Part of what's going to happen as the state goes through its fiscal crisis that it's in right now is we're going to have to change the relationship that the state has historically had with the municipality. And it's really critical for the municipality to be at the table in order to make sure that the terms of those changes don't do too much damage to us.
Okay. Next social media question. Let me pull it up here. We're going to start with Mr. Coffey on this one. Port of Anchorage, how do you propose handling the mismanagement task?
The what task?
Mismanagement task.
You mean the fact that
mismanaged task?
Well, the degree to which it was mismanaged was basically lays with MIRAD and ICRC, the port people who were charged with the actual construction. And the federal courts just ruled that the MIRAD motion to dismiss the city's lawsuit was denied. So we have a claim against the federal government, and I'm told it could be as much as $80 million. There's an estimate by CH2M Hill of $483 million to fix the port, to rebuild the dock. We just don't have that kind of money. We got $130 million in hand. We've got a $40 million worth of debt that we're paying right now out of port fees because that retired some of the debt that was incurred. And we may have have capacity to add another $25 to $40 million in bonded indebtedness based on revenue. That's going to leave us well short of the ability to do it. So we need to continue to do what we've been doing, which is basically shore up the existing facility. It costs us about $2 to $4 million a year, depending on the extent to which it's done. And then we need to figure out a better way to build it rather than spend $483 million, which we're not going to have the funds to do it, unless the state comes through with a general obligation bond for ports and harbors around the state.
Mayor?
Let me ask you this. CH2M Hill has given kind of the report, if
Yes.
I remember right, at 3 something or close to 400 million. You've laid out some of the numbers, but how do you, and I know the Assembly moved a whole package of capital projects, I think almost $1 billion to Juneau, which in this time is going to be very hard. Where would this fit? If you were in the mayor's position, in the list of capital projects that you would go down to Juneau, where would it fit in the mix? And if it's unable to be funded in Juneau, how will you fill that gap? How will you make this project possible, knowing CH2M Hill has said the minimum you need is a little over 330, I think, or 340, I can't remember the exact number of million.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's got to be number one, because if something bad happens to the port, the food doesn't come into Anchorage. You know, we have a short time on that. The lead time between food and delivery of food is a week or so. So that's number one. Number two, we serve 90% of the northern part of the state, everything north of Yakutat, I say. It comes through here, whether it's going down the rivers or over to the Kuskokwim or up the Yukon or to Fairbanks or the North Slope, it comes through here. We're the only port around. So we have to do it. Okay, and we have to find the revenue in which to do it. Mr.
Halcro, big issue. What are your thoughts?
I think actually to answer Senator Begich's question, you know, I think that has to be the priority, but you have to approach that separately. You can't put that in a wish list with roads and highway extensions. Anchorage isn't going to be the only community that's really faces these huge $100+ million capital needs. And I think Fairbanks, Juneau, other large communities are going to find the same thing. And I think we need to approach the legislature to create some kind of innovative bonding mechanism, maybe using permanent fund as a backdrop, something to allow communities to afford.
Out of time. Back to you for 15 seconds.
Well, what I would rather do is I'd rather go to Fairbanks and say, hey, why don't you get behind what Anchorage needs here to build the port, because your stuff comes through our port and goes up on the railroad and on the highway. And if we lose the port, you're going to lose the same things we are, and probably even worse.
Mr. Berkowitz.
This isn't just an Anchorage problem, this is an Alaska problem. And to expect the people of Anchorage to foot the entire bill is wrong. And you look at the $380 or $400 million that's required to modernize the port, we've already got $120 million. We can get some with state bonding capacity, but I think that there's a great opportunity for some public-private partnerships working with the people that benefit from the port in order to develop some of the funding mechanisms that could be available here.
It doesn't pencil. Public-private partnership, there's not sufficient revenue in the port to get the kind of money you need to finish the deal. I've looked at it in some detail. There's just not enough revenue unless you want to raise the tariffs to an astronomical limit, which of course will raise the price of food and everything else in town. So how are you going to do that? It won't work.
So you're on the Assembly. What are your thoughts, Ms. Demboski?
I'm on the Enterprise Committee, and we're looking at this, and we are looking at public-private partnerships, but we're also looking at potential revenue bonds. Here, listen, you have a clear choice in these candidates. Mr. Coffey wants to do a general obligation bond, tax you more. Mr. Halcro wants to talk about using the PFD. Again, Mr. Berkowitz is talking about bonding more. Why don't we start talking about revenue bonds? Why don't we start talking about leveraging the assets that we have to pay for themselves? This is a revenue-generating asset. And you shake your head all you want, but I'm telling you, the finance directors at the ports and I have been having these discussions, and it is a possibility.
Well, I've been meeting with the port on and off for many years, and in fact, the information I get from the port and the income that it's derived from the port is not sufficient to meet the current estimate, and it may be insufficient to meet a much lower estimate.
Just because you say it doesn't make it so. I mean, I sit on the Assembly right now, and I can tell you right now, it's something we're evaluating.
So it's uncertain. I've looked at it in very much detail with the same people that I guess that Ms. Demboski's talking to, and the answer I get is very different. And if I'm wrong, hey, so be it. It's good news. I just find it hard to believe because I know what the revenue streams are at the port. We're barely paying the $4 million we need to keep the port together.
All right, fair enough. We're going to move on here. I have a question for Ms. Demboski dealing with lower oil prices. We've seen these before. In Alaska, people lived here, they went through this starting in the early 80s. The prices didn't recover for several years. Thousands of people lost their jobs, people lost their homes, people moved out of the state. What would you do as mayor to shield Anchorage from the fallout again?
Sure. Well, I think one of the first things I was talking about earlier is we have to be holistic. So one of the best things we know when we start looking at finance, one of the best things to stave off recession is robust development. So we have to look at some of the opportunities in order to open up land, whether we're talking about potential some of the city holdings or working more with some of the, maybe a Klutna, who's a big landowner, not only in the municipality, but the Matsu Borough. But we have to deal with this whole Title 21, the permitting department, and availability of land. But I think I'm probably the only one here that does support a bridge across the inlet. Now, granted, again, we run into the same problem. How do you pay for it, right? So, I look at it and I don't know that that's a priority. To me, it's not. We have to deal with SAP, we have to deal with port, we have so many other things we have to deal with first, but things that are within our control are the municipal lands that are held, the permitting department, Title 21. Those are the things that we can do first, right out of the gate, to start to have a robust economic climate.
Do you think that Anchorage is in a better position now to deal with oil than it was back in the 80s?
Well, I can't speak to the 80s. I am 38, so I can't speak to the 80s. But what I can tell you, Mayor Sullivan has done a very good job with our financials, and so has the Assembly. We have a AAA bond rating, and we have a number of opportunities that we can leverage.
Go ahead.
I just want to throw, as you move to the next question, the municipal fiscal plan that's been approved, a 5-year plan, bases the municipal budget over the next 5 years on $110 barrel of oil.
Yeah, which is definitely a challenge. I mean, we know it.
But it's been approved by the Assembly.
That's not going to be reality now.
Okay, but it's been approved by the Assembly in December.
Sure, right, absolutely. And oil basically bottomed out at the end of last year, right? Nobody knew how long.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Actually, before
if we
that.
see the bottom.
A lot before that.
And that's the thing. I can't predict to you what the price of oil is going to be, and nor do I think you can predict to me what it'll be. But what I do know is we're in a far different financial situation than when you left office.
But what changes to the budget have been made? What changes have to the budget have been made to deal with?
The price is half now.
Well, we do our budget in October, so there will be substantial changes in October when we do our budget.
First quarter budget revision comes now.
April.
We need to hear from the other candidates.
Go ahead,
here.
Mr. Coffey.
Well, don't start the timer. I forgot where we started all along.
Go ahead. You've got some time.
All right. Well, first of all, the fiscal plan is a plan that's developed over time, and it's meant to go on for a long term, and clearly it has to be changed and revised. The new mayor is going to get an opportunity starting the 1st of July, which is a little after the new budget planning period starts, which is probably in June, to work through all of these issues and to recognize the fact that next year's budget is going to be substantially less. We're going to lose about 1/3 of our revenue sharing for the first time, which is for the first next year fiscally, and so on. And there will be other constraints because of the capital budgets being so dramatically reduced. For example, the transportation budget for Anchorage is $47 million. Last year it was $353 million. I mean, you talk about a huge difference. When that $350 gets through the pipeline, we're in trouble.
Okay, Mr. Berkowitz, go ahead.
Well, when you talk about what's different now than was during the 80s crash was a housing bubble that burst. And our economic profile is vastly different today than it was then. Our economy is much more diversified, in large part because of the presence of the native corporations here. They have changed the profile of what the economy looks like. But in terms of making sure that Anchorage itself is buffered, there's 3 things you need to do. You need to find efficiencies. We have 190 buildings in the municipality, not counting the school district. If we deal with the utility component piece of that, we can reduce that, but the utility piece by $5 million. We can sell land.
Okay, I'm sorry you got to wrap it up. Time's getting tight.
And I was just getting warmed up.
Yeah. Mr. Halcro, go ahead.
As somebody who was in Juneau when oil was $10 a barrel and we had $1 billion budget deficit and we were legitimately a year and a half away from being out of money, I will tell you that when you hear people say fiscal policy, what you need to ask is, can they manage, and have they managed? Because the next mayor has to continue to grow the city, has to meet the needs of the city, and has to manage the cost of government. Because the costs that are coming from the state, in the mere fact that over the last 4 or 5 years we've shifted a significant amount of responsibility to the state, and now that will come back, that has to be managed to avoid cost shifts to taxpayers.
And Ms. Demboski, you have the final say on this. Go ahead. 15 seconds, though.
Well, there's no question we're going to be dealing with some significant financial issues in the next many years to come. But we have to step back and we have to look at not only tax policy, but development policy, development systems, how we get through the permitting department. We have to look at everything in a holistic picture, but it's not just run to you and ask you for more tax money.
Okay. Senator has a question for Mr. Halcro.
I'll try to keep this short. Hopefully everyone will answer this as they move through it, but because I've read all the questions that people have answered on this. 1, would you support a sales tax? 2, would it be above or beyond the tax cap, not just replacing property taxes? And 3, what type of sales tax? Seasonal, year-round? And give me your thoughts.
Well, I think talk about a sales tax is premature, but I think the conversation's coming sooner rather than later. I think any sales tax to be effective in any way whatsoever, you have to allocate some under the cap, some for property tax relief, and some outside the tax cap. Otherwise, you're just exchanging revenue for revenue, and you're actually putting homeowners, property taxpayers at more risk by doing that. And the third thing is, I think a seasonal sales tax is problematic. I think, if you're going to have a sales tax, I mean, this is, like I said, this is something 60% of the voters is going to have to approve. But, I mean, a seasonal sales tax tends to target tourists. I think they should pay, but I think they should pay year-round because tourists come here January through December, not just May through September.
If the Assembly voted on a sales tax to be moved to the ballot, would you veto that or allow it to go forward?
Well, it depends on how it's structured, because as you know, a sales tax can be structured in any way, shape, or form. You can exempt seniors, you can exempt medicines, you can exempt professional services.
What would be like the problem area for you?
I think the problem area would be seniors, professional services, those kinds of areas. Something would need to be modified, and of course, dependent upon the percentage. And really, similar to the alcohol tax that was proposed a couple of months ago, my big issue is that there's never any accountability. Okay, you're going to raise the property tax, you're going to raise the sales tax. Where is that money going for? Okay. And what are our accountability?
Okay, we can come back to you, Mr. Demboski, of a rebuttal.
Well, I'm not going to support a sales tax. And why? Because, quite frankly, until we get our books in order and we do things the way we're supposed to do them, and we spend the taxpayers' money, every single penny of it, the best we know how, I'm not going to ask for more money from the taxpayers. If there is a sales tax, the only way I would support it is if it was under the tax cap, if it directly offset dollar for dollar property taxes, and it passed by 60% of the voters.
Mr. Coffey?
Well, I tried a sales tax once several years ago. It failed 60% to 40%, and it spent about 9 months working on it, and it was intended to balance a lot of things. Okay. Secondly, the sales tax that Ms. Demboski supports would basically give a tax break to a whole bunch of major commercial property owners, because she said it has to be dollar for dollar. So it wouldn't be a revenue enhancer. It would just simply shift a burden from one category to another.
I clearly said I did not support a sales tax.
I understand, but you gave the 3 criteria.
I said only if, but I said I do not. So don't mischaracterize what I said. I just said I don't.
I heard what you said, and what you said was if it offset property taxes dollar for dollar. There's residential property taxes and there's commercial building property taxes. The sales tax that I proposed would have offset residential, not commercial. So many of the main big commercial buildings are owned by major corporations.
Okay, Mr. Berkowitz is waiting patiently for his response.
Patiently.
No, I do not support a sales tax.
Neither do I.
You get the last word.
Well, I mean, this is great. I think we're all in agreement that we don't support a sales tax today. But again, you have to govern for tomorrow. And when you look at local communities, sales tax is the one revenue source that's reserved for local communities to take advantage of. So, when we talk again about fiscal policy, this is one of the things, while it's premature today, and I don't think any of us support it, you have to be realistic moving forward, because as Dan said, you're going to either provide a big tax break for commercial landowners or it's going to be dollar for dollar.
Okay, running out of time. We're almost up on the hour. Closing statements. Ms. Demboski, you are first. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
30 seconds.
I just appreciate you both, all 3 of you being here, and my colleagues, or my other candidates. But I would just like to say, you know, if you're looking for a candidate or a mayor who really values the limited role of government, who doesn't come to you with your hand out at the very first hint of trouble, I would say I'm your candidate. Listen, the other candidates have supported income taxes, alcohol taxes, or rating the PFD. That's not me. I'm here because I truly believe in the limited role of government, and I truly believe that we have promise for tomorrow. Please, I would appreciate your vote tomorrow on April 7th.
Okay, Mr. Coffey, you're next.
All right, I think Anchorage is a great city. I think we're going to thrive and prosper over the years. We've got great economic bases, the hospitals, the university, 20,000 students at UAA. The major corporations are located here. Abundant energy. We've addressed the problem in Cook Inlet that was so worrisome in 2009 and 2010. I don't fear for our city in the future one little bit. I think we're going to do just fine, although we're going to have to adjust. It'll be some serious times and some serious decisions will have to be made. I'm a practical guy. I try to delve deep into these things, and I can't. That's my 30 seconds, I guess.
All right, well, Mr.
I appreciate your vote. How's that?
You have 30 seconds, Mr. Halcro.
I've had the privilege of growing up in this town for 50 years, since Tudor Road was a 2-lane dirt road. This town has amazing promise. It's been good to me. It's been good to my family. It's been good to the people I love. The next mayor has a lot on their plate, and what I would really encourage the people at home to do is go to the websites, look at the bios, especially the personal and professional backgrounds. Look who's been a leader in the business community, in government, in the nonprofit sector. Look for the candidate who's really going to be able to meet the challenges of this city, and I would appreciate your vote tomorrow.
And Mr. Berkowitz, you have the last word tonight. Go ahead.
I want to thank Channel 11 for hosting us and bringing this panel together, and the people that spent their evening watching us. And just close on this note, which is, I've seen too much of politics that's all about winning an argument instead of solving problems. And I have incredible faith in the people of Anchorage, and I know that if we pull together and work together, we can solve the problems. And I'd appreciate your vote tomorrow, April 7th. Thank you.
All right, very good. And that concludes the debate. We want to let you know that there are 11 candidates running for office. You can see the other 9 candidates online at KTVA.com. We invite you to look there. Also, don't forget to vote. Polling place is open on Election Day from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the information. KTVA 11 Nightcast is next. Good night.